There are monuments that scrape the sky and monuments that hold back the fury of nature itself. The Hoover Dam is both. But what you see when you stand before its 726-foot face is not merely concrete and steel. Every foot of height was paid for with the sweat and the lives of men who today have been forgotten by those who flip a light switch in Las Vegas or Los Angeles and never wonder where that power was born. We begin in the dust. 1929. The stock market has collapsed and America is on its knees. Families line up for bread. Men stand on corners with signs that beg for work, any work, because dignity is measured in the weight of coins in your pocket. But out west there is a different kind of crisis, one that has been brewing for centuries. The Colorado River is a wild beast. It floods in spring with the fury of snowmelt from the Rockies, carrying 17 million tons of silt downstream every year. It dries to a trickle in summer, leaving farmland cracked and useless. 7 states are screaming for water, for control, for something to promise their people a future. The West cannot grow if the river will not bend. Someone in Washington decides the answer is not negotiation. It is domination. They will build a wall so massive that the river will have no choice but to obey. They will create a lake where there was only canyon. They will generate electricity from the very force that once destroyed crops and drowned livestock. It is madness, but it is the kind of madness that only desperate men embrace. The site chosen is Black Canyon, a throat of rock on the border between Nevada and Arizona, where the sun turns the air into a furnace, and the stone walls rise like the ribs of some ancient leviathan. The temperature there regularly exceeds 120 degrees Fahrenheit. In summer, it climbs higher still, touching 140 degrees on the canyon floor where the men will work. This is where they will build. In 1931, the first men arrive. They come from every corner of the country. Farmers who have lost their land, miners who have lost their shafts, fathers who have lost everything but the strength in their backs and the hope that this job, this one impossible job, will feed their children. They are promised 60 cents an hour, which might as well be a king's ransom when the alternative is starvation. The company builds a town for them in the desert, Boulder City, a grid of wooden barracks and mess halls where alcohol is forbidden and rules are strict. Men sleep in shifts because there are not enough beds. Families crowd into tiny spaces. Women wash clothes in the scalding heat and try to keep children from wandering too close to the canyon edge. They do not know yet what they have signed up for. They do not know that the canyon will try to kill them in 100 different ways. The first task is to move the river. You cannot build a dam while water is trying to drown your foundation. So they drill 4 tunnels through the canyon walls, each 56 feet in diameter, each nearly a mile long. Imagine the noise. Imagine the dust. The men work in shifts around the clock, hammering through solid rock with pneumatic drills that shake their bones and fill their lungs with silica. The dust is so thick that breathing becomes a kind of slow drowning. Some men will develop silicosis, a hardening of the lungs that turns each breath into glass. The company does not call it an occupational disease. They call it pneumonia. That way, they do not have to pay. Workers die in the tunnels, and their bodies are carried out on stretchers while the next shift marches in. The work cannot stop. The river waits for no one. When the tunnels are finally complete, they blast a passage, and the river roars through, leaving the canyon floor exposed like a wound. Now the real work begins. They must excavate down to bedrock, removing every loose stone, every grain of sand, because the dam cannot rest on anything but the bones of the earth itself. They pour the first bucket of concrete on June 7, 1933. It is not one massive pour. That would be suicide. Concrete generates heat as it cures, and a single monolithic block of this size would take more than a century to cool. It would crack. It would fail. So the engineers designed something different. They pour the dam in interlocking columns. each block no more than 5 feet high, creating a structure that looks like a massive honeycomb when seen from above. And inside each block, they thread a network of pipes, over 600 miles of 1-inch steel tubing, through which they pump ice-cold water from a refrigeration plant built specifically for this purpose. The Colorado River water is used, cycled, and cooled to steal the heat from the concrete so that it can set in months instead of lifetimes. It is a stroke of genius. It is also exhausting. The work is relentless. Men dangle from ropes bolted into the canyon walls, smoothing the rock face with jackhammers so the concrete will have something to grip. They call them high scalers. They swing like pendulums hundreds of feet above the canyon floor, wearing canvas hats dipped in tar to protect their heads from falling rocks. Some fall. Some are struck by falling debris. The foremen below do not always stop to retrieve the bodies immediately. Time is money. The heat is merciless. Men collapse. Some die on the spot, their hearts simply giving out under the combined assault of temperature and exertion. Trucks spray water on the worksite, but it evaporates before it hits the ground. Workers soak their shirts and watch them dry, stiff with salt, in minutes. The official count will eventually list 96 men as having died during construction, though some historians believe the real number is higher when you count those who died from delayed effects of silicosis and heat-related illness after leaving the site. 96 names, 96 families told their father, their husband, their son will not be coming home. But there are whispers of more. There are always whispers. Here is where the myth begins, the one that refuses to die, no matter how many times it is debunked. People say there are bodies entombed in the concrete. They say men fell into the wet pour and were simply buried, that the schedule was too tight, the pressure too great, that contractors ordered the work to continue, and now those men are part of the structure forever. It makes for a good ghost story. But it is not true. The concrete was poured in small sections, carefully monitored. Any man who fell in would have been retrieved. The dam is not a grave in that sense, but it is a grave nonetheless, because every ton of those 6.6 million tons carries the memory of men who gave everything and received so little in return. The first man to die on the project was J.G. Tierney, a surveyor who drowned in the river on December 20th, 1922, while doing preliminary work. The last man to die was Patrick Tierney, his son, who fell from one of the intake towers on December 20th, 1935, exactly 13 years later. The river took the father. The dam took the son. Tell me there is no poetry in that darkness. By 1935, the dam is nearly complete. It rises like a cliff where no cliff should be, a smooth, concrete face that curves gently against the pressure of what will become Lake Mead. The arch-gravity design means the water's own force pushes the dam deeper into the canyon walls, making it stronger the more it holds back. The lake begins to fill. Water that once ran wild now pools behind the wall, rising foot by foot, day by day, until it stretches 112 miles upstream. It is the largest man-made reservoir in the United States at the time of its creation, holding enough water to cover the entire state of Connecticut to a depth of 10 feet. At full capacity, Lake Mead contains 9.3 trillion gallons of water, enough to supply the entire country for months. The power generators are installed deep within the dam, 17 massive turbines that will eventually produce over 4 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity per year, enough to light cities and pump water to farms across the Southwest. On September 30th, 1935, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt arrives to dedicate the structure. He stands before the crowds and speaks of American ingenuity, of triumph over nature, of a new era. He does not mention the men in the canyon who breathed their last in temperatures that would cook meat. He does not talk about the widows still living in Boulder City, wondering how to feed their children on a dead man's wages. The dam works. It works so well that it reshapes the entire region. Los Angeles grows into a sprawling metropolis fed by water and power from the Colorado. Las Vegas transforms from a desert outpost into a glittering oasis of neon and sin. Farms bloom in California's Imperial Valley, turning arid land into one of the most productive agricultural zones on the planet. The dam becomes a symbol of what America can do when it decides to bend the world to its will. Tourists come by the thousands, then by the millions, to stand on the crest and look down at the dizzying drop, to feel the hum of the generators beneath. Their feet to take photographs and buy postcards and never once think about the bones that made it possible. They marvel at the Art Deco design, at the bronze statues of winged figures that flank the monument, at the terrazzo floor inlaid with a star chart showing the exact position of the heavens on the day of dedication. They do not ask why those details mattered when men were dying of thirst in the tunnels below. But if you know where to look, you can still see them. Not literally, of course. The concrete has long since cured. The cooling pipes have been drained and sealed. The canyon walls no longer echo with the sound of drills and dynamite. But the shadows remain. Walk through the tunnels inside the dam, and you can feel the weight of history pressing down. Read the names on the memorial plaques, and you realize how young some of them were, how far they had traveled, how little choice they had. The dam stands as a monument to human ambition, yes, but also to the expendability of human life when ambition is all that matters. These men were not heroes in the classical sense. They were not soldiers storming a beach. They were laborers, trying to survive the Depression, trying to send money home, trying to matter in a world that had forgotten them. There is a particular cruelty in the way we remember the Hoover Dam. We celebrate the engineering. We marvel at the statistics. 6.6 million tons of concrete, 726 feet tall, 60 stories of solid mass anchored into living rock, enough steel reinforcement to build a railroad from New York to San Francisco, a base thickness of 660 feet, tapering to 45 feet at the crest. But we do not teach our children the names of the men who mixed that concrete in 120-degree heat. We do not tell them about the ones who drowned when the river broke through a cofferdam in February of 1932. We do not mention the scalers who fell and were not caught by their safety lines, whose bodies hit the canyon floor with a sound that made other men vomit. We do not talk about the families who were paid a pittance in compensation and told to be grateful their loved one had died in service of something greater. What dam, what lake, what kilowatt of electricity justifies the erasure of the people who made it real? And yet, the dam endures. It will outlive all of us. Concrete cures stronger over time. The structure is more solid today than it was in 1936. Engineers estimate it could stand for millennia if left untouched. Long after our cities have crumbled, long after the names on the plaques have faded to nothing, the wall will still be there, holding back the river, a testament to what we were willing to sacrifice in the name of progress. That is both comforting and terrifying. The Colorado River still flows, though it is no longer wild. It is measured, managed, allocated down to the last drop. 7 states still fight over it. Droughts have lowered Lake Mead to levels that expose rocks not seen since the dam was built. The white ring of calcium carbonate on the canyon walls marks where the water used to be, a bathtub ring on a continental scale. Climate change is rewriting the rules. The snowpack in the Rockies is thinner. The river carries less. The dam still generates power, still provides water, but the future is uncertain. The same structure that was supposed to guarantee the West's prosperity may not be able to keep that promise forever. And when it fails, if it fails, will we remember the men who built it? Or maybe we will move on like we did this time. Here is the truth the Hoover Dam teaches us. We are capable of staggering feats. We can move rivers. We can turn deserts into gardens. We can light entire cities with the force of falling water. But we are also capable of terrible indifference. We can look at a man dying of heat stroke in a canyon and decide his death is acceptable because the schedule must be met. We can call silicosis pneumonia so the numbers look better. We can build a monument and never carve the names of the people who made it into the stone. That is the secret buried in the concrete. Not bodies, but betrayal. The betrayal of labor by capital. The betrayal of individuals by institutions. The betrayal of memory by progress. Stand at the edge of the dam today and look out over Lake Mead. The water is blue and calm. Boats dot the surface. Fishermen cast their lines. It looks peaceful, but listen closely. If the wind is right, you can almost hear the echoes, the clang of hammers on rock, the shouts of foremen, the prayers of men who knew they might not see tomorrow. They are still there, in a way, not in the concrete, but in the space between what we celebrate and what we choose to forget. So if you, or maybe someone you know, worked on the dam, if you carry in your blood the legacy of those men who moved mountains so the West could be born, share that story. Do not let it disappear into the same silence that swallowed their names.